Hey there guys, DMO73 here, bringing you another feature match for the week. This week I am playing the Shion's Castling list. This is a Dark Shion list that was initially created by an Italian player and then modified by my fellow Team OGRE Ipank, aka Dark Grim, to make use of some different cards, and he actually used this deck to win his nationals and get his invite to Worlds. And I'm playing against my friend Will Smola, who is playing a green-white base Reflect Refrain fairies list. So should be a fun match. Hopefully we get to see some good stuff, show off a little bit of both decks, and we'll go from here. So Will won the die roll, so he will be going first, just as a heads up. So let's go ahead and see. I'm going to go ahead and mulligan 3. I'm looking for a Regalia off the top. Honestly, I have that Gil Lapis, and I do have a Levitine, but I'm hoping to get a Hydromonica. Being on the draw is definitely something that's a little bit scary against fairies. They have the capability to go very explosive, very fast. We'll get that Windstone off the top and place his Wind Sprite, and then it's going to filter. So this is already in a bad spot, especially if he gets a Lightstone next turn, because he has the ability to drop a turn to Vivian, which is a little bit of a concern. Going into my turn, I do get a Regalia off the top, so I don't have to worry about it, but I end up hitting a Hymnal's Memoria, and I call the Messenger's Familiar, so I get that card for free. And then unfortunately, I don't think I have a 1-drop here, so I have to pass. Really rough start against fairies, not being able to answer their turn 1. He does get the Fairies Memoria. Out comes the Vivian. That's just going to be a really bad way for me to have to deal with now. And he's going to go ahead and filter again. So the problem here is he gets to now get very explosive. So even though we're in very low total with Will, with fairies, he's going to be able to use Vivian and Reflect and everything else to just flood the board unless I can answer that Vivian almost immediately. And that is the trick here. So I do get a Ruler's Memoria, which is helpful, but he also put that protection of the fairies on her, which is really not good because she can prevent the next damage that would be dealt to her, and she has a little bit of a stat pump. So that's also not good. You see I have that Priscia in my hand. If I had had another Levitine or something else like that, I could have immediately made this situation better by just breaking out the Valentina side of Priscia, and then just taking Vivian, and I'm just way ahead at this point, because probably his hand is not very many, and I've got a protection of the fairies on a Vivian, so I can protect it and everything else, just kind of steal it from him. But unfortunately I didn't have that answer there, so he flashes in using Vivian at the end of my turn, a Water Sprite, and then goes into his turn, taps for another stone, gets another Fairies Memoria, reveals that he has the Envoy, which is also not good for me because he has no access to Hexproof. So out comes Fairy of Sacred Vision, we get a proc on Vivian, and then out probably comes another fairy, I would imagine. Yep, another Wind Sprite, I believe, is going to come out here. Yep, another Wind Sprite. So now he's got even more Will production, so he's way ahead. A second proc on the Vivian. So lots of damage is about to come at my face. So 600 damage from the first Water Sprite. And then, yes, I know that's the Wind Sprite he put into play this turn, but he leaves the other one up, so it doesn't really matter. For another 600. And then from Vivian, another 1100 damage because of 2 procs, and then the pump up. So he's going to use Reflects to untap Vivian at the end of his turn. This essentially just puts me on a 1-turn clock, which is less than ideal for me to be dealing with. So I use Space-Time Anomaly during his upkeep to try to give a -5/-5 to Vivian. This is honestly not my best move here. So like, once he responds by putting that out, he actually puts it on the Fairy of Sacred Vision, which I think is an interesting play. I feel like he should have just put it on the Vivian and, you know, made sure that his Vivian just stays safe for the turn. And I definitely don't take advantage of it like I should, because I probably could have survived for easily another turn if I had just did what I talked about before of playing Valentina, immediately sacrificing it, and just taking the Vivian. That would have meant he only had maybe like 500 damage on board, tops, you know, 600, 700 damage on board is what he would have had if I took the Vivian. And I could have definitely survived for a lot longer. But I didn't think about that. So I was thinking about I did some math kind of wrong in my head here, and I ended up using the space-time anomaly. It's all about against fairies. When you're playing against fairies, it is, and you don't have a board wipe, it is 100% all about just, taking care of Vivian. So what I try to do here is I actually have another Levantine that I'm drawing into off the space-time anomaly. And I try and do something a little bit fancy to keep a creature, is by paying a green and playing the Priscia to be able to kill the Vivian off the other damage, but he just uses a wall of wind and cancels it. So at that point I just scoop the game and we go into game 2. So I'm going to be on the play here, so hopefully I can get a little bit more action in and show a little bit more of what the Shion deck is capable of. So, unfortunately, did not see a Regalia in my first turn, so I don't get a first turn play, which is just brutal here, especially after my way bad start with game 1. So he reveals that Water Sprite. He has to play, and he reveals a Wall of Wind, so he does not get that. It also gives me information. Just going to be drawing into a Wall of Wind next turn. Then he puts a Protection of the Fairies on it as well. So it's a little bit bigger stats now, and then filters with Reflect, and he puts that Wall of Wind on the bottom of the deck, so he does not want that. So I have Regalia, so I'm not going to get punished this turn. Get a Black Moon's Memoria, comes the Messenger's Familiar, and then Alice's Little Scout, and I pass the turn to Will. Taps for another stone, gets a First Light's Memoria. His hand must be pretty not that great as well, because he just goes straight into combat, deals me 400 damage with his Water Sprite, and then is going to untap it at the end of the turn. And then passes. So no plays for Will. I'm going to use Hydromonica to shuffle that card down to the bottom that I don't want. Tapping for another stone, hit another Ruler's Memoria. Pay 1 for another Alice's Little Scout. Pay 1 for another Messenger's Familiar. And then pass the turn to him. At this point, I'm kind of okay taking these little, pings of 400 damage. It's not that big of a deal, especially now that I'm in a position where next turn I'm going to be able to flip Shion effectively with Hydromonica to get my big kind of combo out that we've seen from practically every Shion player. Celestial Wing Seraph and Lucifer, that's kind of the go-to hit for Shion. So he's going to go ahead and filter. Thinking about what he wants to put down on the bottom. He does have the will to be able to play Vivian, so I imagine that's what he probably plays here. I mean, it's his way to kind of catch up, right? So, yep, out comes the Vivian. I think he just passes the turn here because he's staring down a lot of aggression, but he decides to actually swing in for 4. get some more damage in, or sorry, 600 because of the Vivian proc, and then passes the turn. So I'm going to draw. I'm going to use Hydromonica to stack a card on top of the deck. It doesn't really matter that I shuffle because I'm just going back in and he doesn't have any will or any way to disrupt the play. So I do Judgment. Out comes Shion. And then out comes Celestial Wing Seraph. And then out comes Lucifer. So Lucifer's going to trigger. So when Lucifer resolves, he has to sacrifice a creature. So what makes an interesting play here? He could easily sacrifice the Wind Sprite, but he wants to save that protection of the fairies. So what he does instead is he taps and uses Vivian to bring in, one, get a stat proc, and two, just bring in a Wind Sprite that he's immediately going to sacrifice. So it's a very interesting play. It actually works out really well for him because if he didn't do that, because of the Vivian proc, he actually puts me in a tough bind. So I was originally going to plan to kill the Wind Sprite, and I don't have swiftness with Shion right now, so she's just kind of dead on board, so all I can attack with is my little scouts and stuff. So I'm going to deal 200 damage to it and draw a card. I'm kind of hoping to draw into something effective here right now by crashing in my little dudes and trying to take some stuff out. So we're talking about the stats right now. I'm going to swing in with a Messenger's Familiar, and I get to search for a Swell Apostle. I'm grabbing a Domberly. Domberly is an amazing card to utilize with Messenger Familiar and Alice's Little Scout. It essentially becomes a search, drawing 2 cards, and dealing your opponent 400 damage is really nice. Well, sorry, your opponent losing 400 life. So I'm going to crash in the other Alice's Little Scout because Will didn't want to cut my deck, and the card that was on top was just what I needed, which was a Levantine. So this is why you always cut your opponent's decks, folks. When they ask, you always cut. So they might have stuff like that. So I go ahead and swing in. I don't really necessarily know why he didn't play the use the Protection of the Fairies on the Vivian there. Yes, it would have meant that his Water Sprite would have immediately died, but his Vivian would have definitely been safe, and he could have maybe made a comeback play. So it's kind of like sacrificing his Water Sprite to save the Vivian. Plays another Protection of the Fairies on it for free. So now it has 600, 700 natural stats. And then he decides to swing, and I just block with Celestial Wing Seraph. And then he sacrifices one of the Protection of the Fairies to make sure that it doesn't die. I think at this point maybe Will's a little bit on edge because he's staring down a very, very large board, and he's trying to figure out how to answer it. And he kind of forgot that Celestial Wing Seraph and Lucifer have flying. So he goes ahead and stacks an untap trigger on the fairy, and then flips over, does Judgment. Go to my turn. Now what I should be doing here is I should be going for damage first, but I get a little bit ahead of myself. And I play a Galapis, and then in response to the trigger, Will actually does something that's pretty handy here. So he plays Interdimensional Escape in response to the Galapis trigger, so I'm about to lose 3 of those creatures. I'll still get the triggers off of Gil Lapis, and then when I sacrifice Messenger Familiar, I'll get the search as well. So I still kind of only end up going in terms of total cards -1, but it was an okay play here because he can just bounce my remaining creature with Reflect, but at the same time it kind of just leaves him really vulnerable to Shion for the turn. He doesn't really have an answer there, so he either has to take the damage from Shion or block it and sacrifice his protection of the fairies as well, which again puts me at a higher time of being able to play the game. So I'm going to swing in for 10, get the trigger from Shion, or sorry, from Celestial Wing Seraph. And he's going to, in response to the trigger, he's debating whether or not to bounce with Reflect. I think that's what you kind of have to do. You don't want me gaining any more life. So 0 angels on the board when it resolves, so I don't gain any life. And then Shion's going to swing in for 11. So one thing I could have also done there is sacrificed every single creature that I had to remove with Interdimensional to Levitine to get a bunch of extra taps to put on a bunch of more damage. But that honestly, that would be the natural thing that I should have done, but I just wasn't thinking about it. So Will's in a pretty interesting spot here. He really doesn't have a way to kill Shion, but he does have, Will open and Reflect and all kinds of answers there. So he plays Circle of Trust to grab himself a Vivian, and I believe, Water Sprite. Water Sprite's really helpful for him because it does let him, search for more fairies potentially. So. But, again, this is why you always shuffle and cut your opponent's deck to kind of potentially mess up their play. He swings in for 4, stacks an untapped trigger on it, and then flips over Reflect. And then passes the turn. He didn't have the will right now to be able to play the Wind Sprite, or at least he's saving some stuff up. So I play Valentina. He attempts to Wall of Wind, and I discard a Levitine to produce the extra will. So that's going to go through. And he attempts to bounce, and I sacrifice my Valentina to Levitine for a tap and untap, and then get to steal his Water Sprite. He has no other answers to that, so gonna swing for another 11 because I didn't think to tap. That was another missed opportunity for 200 damage. I could have tapped Levitine, sacked Valentina, then recovered Levitine and tapped it again. But I didn't do that, so now, but I'm still ahead, and I'm still feeling pretty secure here. At most, he can play a Vivian, because he only has the 3 will to be able to play with. And Vivian's definitely something that I can answer. So Vivian comes out. Will decides to filter, I believe, and then flip over again. At this point with Levitine and Shion on the board, there's really nothing much that Reflect Refrain can do to me to put me in a bad way. So, because I can't interact with Shion at all, and I have access to God's Art and all kinds of stuff. So I'm going to play a Hydromonica. He lets that resolve. Attempts to swing in for 400 damage. He's going to attempt to bounce, and I, in response, sacrifice it to Levitine to get an extra pump in there. So now I'm a 9-10, dealing 1100 damage with Shion. And at this point, I just go in for, I know that I can just get lethal here with what I have. So I swing in for 11. He goes to block, or no, sorry, he goes to use Vivian to bring in a creature. He brings in Water Sprite, which will reveal a interdimensional escape, so he'll whiff on that again. And then he'll go to block, and in response, I'm going to God's Art and kill the Water Sprite. So I get an extra 500 and get to kill the Water Sprite, and then I get to tap for another 200 damage. So that puts me up to 1800, so that's exact lethal swinging through with Shion. So we move into game 3. So once again, I'm going to be on the draw against fairies, so I kind of really need a strong opening in order to be able to do something. You see in my hand there, I have a Hydromonica and a Levantine, which is really nice, but I need some other answers. There's also a Valentina you see there in my hand, Valentina Priscia. I forgot to flip it back over, but that's my fault. It gets that Fairies Memoria off the top. Now comes the Wind Sprite. I'm already in a bad way. He's got, essentially at this point, the will to be able to play Vivien if he has it, if I don't kill that Wind Sprite immediately. Get that Ruler's Memoria off the top, which is nice, but unfortunately I don't have anything to play off of it. So again, not a bad position, not a good position for me to be in. See that turn to Vivien come out, so strong start, and he uses the untap on the Wind Sprite to keep it alive. So I don't want the card that's on top, so ship it away with Hydromonica, and then I recover. Tap for my second stone. It is a Black Moon's Memoria. It's exactly what I didn't want to see, because if it had been literally anything else, I could have played that Valentina that I have in my hand and stolen the Vivien and gotten way ahead and disrupted him, but unfortunately I hit one of the 2 Black Moon's Memorias, so sometimes you just get burned by your stones a little bit. There's only 2 of those in the deck, so I was kind of sad to see that happen, because I knew that I was going to be able to steal the Vivien, and he had no way to stop it at that point, and it would have massively disrupted his play. Taps for another stone, gets another Fairies Memoria, reveals another Wind Sprite. So he's up to 3 will and lots of 1-drop fairies in his hand. Technically 4 will. He uses 2 for Oberon, which procs Vivien. So there's 1 + 2 + 2 for all fairies. And a Water Sprite, which he gets another proc off of all the fairies. Reveals the Water Sprite, gets another interdimensional escape, so he also doesn't get to hit anything off of that. And then plays a Flame Sprite, which is really not good for me because it's going to get all those stat pumps, and all those stat pumps, and then it has swiftness, so I'm taking a lot of damage here. So there's 11 from Vivien, 6 from the Water Sprite, or sorry, 8 from the Water Sprite, and 8 from the Flame Sprite. I'm down to 1300 already. Again, this is why if I had hit any other stone, I would have been fine. And then he just uses Reflect to untap Vivien at the end of the turn. See, none of this would have been nearly as oppressive if I had stolen the Vivien off of his turn. At best, he could have played, you know, the Oberon and stuff like that, but they wouldn't have gotten any of those stat pumps that made them so good. So I actually get lucky here, and I do get to flip over with Reflect, or with Shion, because there was a Celestial Wing Seraph on the top of the deck. For getting Celestial Wing Seraph and Lucifer again, making him sacrifice a creature. But unfortunately, it doesn't really matter without target attack. I probably still could have tapped for stone and played the Valentina and stolen Vivien, but at this point, there's so much damage on board, it doesn't really matter, because he was probably going to tap Vivien in response, and then he could swing in for 2, 4, 6, 8. He still would have been able to deal the 1300 damage without any of the pumps, and I wouldn't have been able to block because he probably would have flashed it and tapped the Vivien, and I would just be out of luck. So yeah, you see he has another Wind Sprite in hand there, so he could have just flashed it in. The other thing is he could have flashed it in easily at that point to give it hexproof with his Envoy. So really nothing I can do there. So we get a stat proc because the Envoy gets flashed in during the upkeep. And we're gonna recover everything. Will doesn't have swiftness, so there's really no point in him tapping for stone. Or there's really no point in him flipping, because he definitely has lethal on board this turn. This is a situation where if I was playing him in a tournament, I would probably request a judge to come over and watch for slow play. He only has 3 will and 2 cards in hand, and only so many options that he can do. So he's taking a little bit of time. This is something that I'll kind of be possibly talking about later in some other videos. Goes ahead and play. Actually filters into another Vivian, so he gets 2 Vivian procs here instead of just 1. So that ended up working pretty well for him, and really not well for me. At this point I have 2 blockers, and he has more than that in terms of attackers. So swings in with the Oberon. I definitely blocked that. Swings in for 800. Swings in for 800 with the Water Sprite. Which I have to take. So I got on to 500. Swings in for 800 with the Flame Sprite. Celestial Wing Seraph doesn't actually die there. I catch it. It's not enough damage. But then just Vivian swings through and finishes the game off. So there you have it, guys. You see that Alice's Castling in my hand. I never got the chance to use it, unfortunately. Vivian Swarm with Fairies is too strong. But go ahead and leave your comments down below. Deck profiles on Saturday. And until next time, guys, this is DMO73 signing off.